Hey everybody, my name's Timothy. I'm an alcoholic.
Hey
Hey Tim.
Tim.
Hey
Uh,
Timothy.
Calling in from Los Angeles, California. Hey everybody. Uh, Robert, thanks for asking me to speak. Definitely was not expecting that today, but pleasant surprise. And I feel like I've been going through a lot of stuff in life lately, so it's definitely good to be able to be of service. So I'm grateful for the opportunity. I have a sobriety date. It's October 20th of 2008. I have two home groups now. Uh, this is my online home group. I've been coming to this meeting every week for basically every week for a few months now, and I'm really enjoying it. And it's definitely added a nice kind of flavor to my sobriety, having these contacts week after week with you folks. So I've been really grateful for this meeting as of late. And I have another home group here in California, here in Los Angeles, called Never Had a Legal Drink. It's on Tuesday night at 8:15 in Silver Lake. If you're ever in the area, please reach out. I'd love to meet you and get to a meeting together. Um, yeah, I have a sobriety date. It's October. Did I say this? I don't even know. I just woke up from a nap. I'm a little out of it, so forgive me if this is less than cogent, but I'm going to do my best. The sobriety date is October 20th of 2008, which is just insanity to me because I got sober. You know, there are people in this meeting who got sober younger than I did, but I got sober when I was 18. I'm now 28. I'm coming up on 10 years next month if I don't drink. Which is just so wild because, as a teenage alcoholic, I thought I was going to die by the time I was 18. And instead, I ended up getting sober, which has just been an incredible, journey. Yeah, and I have a sponsor. I just got a new sponsor here in LA because my old one is moving out of town. And I also keep in touch with my last sponsor that I had in New York, which is where I moved, basically kind of where I moved from to LA about a year ago. Uh, so yeah, I grew up in New York City. I grew up in, it's funny when I tell people I grew up in New York City because I did technically, but I grew up in this gated community in the outskirts of Queens called Breezy Point. And for those of you that don't know about it, it's like a conservative enclave in an otherwise kind of liberal city. So I grew up in this kind of what people wanted to be kind of like a 1950s American dream, but it was just very strange. There were a lot of nice people, but there was also a lot of alcoholism. Like every opportunity was, an experience to drink, basically to excess. And I'm sure that there were people who weren't doing that, but even from my experience as a child, I remember just a lot of drinking. And as a child, I was not very happy. I'm going to speak in kind of general terms, but I grew up in a household with, I was the youngest child by a number of years, and both of my parents were sober, but there was definitely some dysfunction. I experienced that dysfunction. I experienced trauma at a young age, and all of that definitely affected my emotional landscape. And it made it so that I was isolated. I didn't feel very supported. As a child, I felt a lot of discomfort being in my own skin, an incredible amount of discomfort, and just a lot of really negative emotions that I had no tools to deal with. And coming from an Irish Catholic family in a majority Irish Catholic neighborhood, we did not talk about our feelings. And it didn't feel okay for me to be for me to be experiencing what I was experiencing. And, I basically was out at sea without a paddle or a life vest or whatever the metaphor is. So as I said, I have an older sister, and when I was 8, she was finishing her first year in college, and she came home for the summer with a few friends from college, and I remember them drinking in my backyard, and and I saw some magic. I saw that alcohol was facilitating some type of community among these people, and I felt isolated, and I didn't feel like I had that, and I told my mom, who had been sober for probably like 20 years at that point. I was like, Mom, I want to drink because like that looks really cool and that looks really fun. And I can't imagine the horror that she must have experienced when her 8-year-old son was like, I want to drink alcohol, Mom. But I saw how alcohol brought people together, and I saw the freedom that they were experiencing, and I wanted to experience that. And a few years later, I did. I took my first drink when I was 12, and I don't really remember that first drink, to be totally honest. I know a lot of people, especially where I got sober in Baltimore, would talk about how they remember the first drink. They knew, they could remember how the glass looked, this, that, whatever. That wasn't really my experience. I never drank for taste. I never drank for, like the aesthetic of how the glass, I didn't care. I would drink out of the bottle. I drank for the effect. And, despite all the things that happened in my childhood, whatever, like my family of origin doesn't make me an alcoholic necessarily. The trauma I experienced as a child doesn't make me an alcoholic. What makes me an alcoholic is that I like the effect that alcohol produces, and I'm willing to pursue that, basically to the gates of insanity or death. So this experience that I had when I was 12 years old, drinking these 10 or so drinks over the course of this day, was I felt a sense of freedom, and I felt a sense of peace that I don't consciously remember ever having before in my entire life. And I felt like I could be in my own skin, and I could be around other people, and I could be okay. And, having no other tools, having no feeling of support from family, friends, what have you, I wanted to have that experience of feeling okay as much as I possibly could. And, basically, I don't want to do like a super long drunk log, but the story of my drinking is that it got worse, never better. Over time, as I got older, I was able to access alcohol more easily, and I drank more frequently, and I drank larger quantities. And, as I got older and as I drank more frequently and drank larger quantities, my, I had a blackout for the first time when I was 14 years old. I had no intention to black out that night. But I went out and, really I experienced that phenomenon of craving for the first time. And what the phenomenon of craving is, for anyone who maybe doesn't know, is, when I put alcohol into my system, I lose control over like how much I'm going to take thereafter. So I have one drink. The line I've heard is like, the man takes a drink, the person takes a drink, the drink takes the person. And that's definitely like my experience, and was my experience that night. I had that one drink, and all of a sudden I couldn't stop drinking, and I drank until I blacked out and ultimately passed out. And, you know, that just kind of is a good example of how the rest of my drinking went. If the alcohol was there, I was drinking it. And I drank until it wasn't there anymore, or until I blacked out and then I had no idea what was going on. Um, or until I passed out. And so that's basically just how it went. There were definitely points in my sobriety when my drinking took a step up, where I like kind of graduated to a new level. Um, that experience at 14 was definitely one of them. At 15, my dad I guess at 14, my dad got sick with cancer again, and he passed away. And like in the past, I've looked at that as kind of like, I was really, I just jumped into drinking, and drugs aren't a big part of my story, but I started taking drugs for the first time. I remember like my cousin had gotten his teeth pulled, and he came to town for the funeral, and he was like, "Hey man, do you want to like take this Vicodin?" And I was like, "Okay." Like then that was like day one after my dad passed away. And so I was willing to do whatever I could do to get out of to get out of my sense of overwhelming like grief, but numb, but discomfort. And yeah, I remember after the funeral, my friend was giving me a ride home. There was a few of us in the car, and I just turned to my friend and I was like, "Yo, let's have a party at my house tonight." And he was like, "Are you sure?" I was like, "Yeah, let's do it." And we set up a tent in my backyard, and that tent just like didn't come down for the whole summer. And it was just basically just like, my mom, who like had all of this experience in AA and who like knew about alcoholism, just like she was dealing with her own grief, and she was like, and my dad was kind of like the enforcer in the relationship. So there was just like no holding me accountable anymore. And I just did whatever I wanted to do, whatever I needed to do to get by. And so that was kind of like a step up, and, kind of adding drugs into the mix. And, the next step was like going to college at 17. For whatever reason, I've always been okay at school without really having to apply myself that much. And I was able to graduate from high school doing pretty well, despite everything. And so I went off to college when I was 17 and to Baltimore. And what my thoughts were about it when I went was like, oh, I am a veteran drinker at this point. I've been drinking for 5 years. I'm not going to be like one of these amateurs who goes to college and, whatever. Like, it's not even going to affect my drinking. Like, I'm a pro at this point. No big deal. That was not the case at all. Now that I had no parental oversight, it was just like, oh, I could do whatever I want. Really? And that meant getting drunk as often as I possibly could and not going to class. And, it's amazing how difficult it is to do. I mean, for me, in school, when like you don't show up, like I guess the saving grace for me in high school was like, oh, I always showed up. But I just stopped showing up, and drinking became the primary drive of my life. And, needless to say, I did not do very well my first year of college. That summer, after my freshman year, I came back home, and I was lifeguarding in my hometown, and I got to this place in my drinking where I was drinking every single day, and to the extent that our check got direct deposited like Friday night at maybe it was Thursday night at like midnight. And I would be at the bar at 11:45, standing by the ATM machine, like looking at my watch, waiting for the money to come through, because I had spent all my whole paycheck up until that point um, on booze, and emotionally, I was just like, it was such a messed up summer, and emotionally, I was just on the rocks. And I was didn't know it at the time, but I would basically be like working, like sitting on the lifeguard stand, supposed to be like making sure people were safe, and I was like going into mild withdrawals, kind of like shaking on the stand. And I got to this place where I just, I got to that place where um, I didn't, I realized that it was out of control. And up until that point, it was just like, oh yeah, I drink, I'm a heavy drinker, but like, I'm just like, I'm just partying. It's all good. Like no big deal. Um, but I started to see that maybe that wasn't the case. And I tried to stop on my own. And, this lifeguard party came up, lifeguard prom, and I couldn't not go to lifeguard prom, but I knew that if I went, I would drink. So I went and I drank, and I got super drunk, and it was just I just did insane shit the whole night. And, it was not like insane fun. It was just insanity looking back on it. And, I had that experience of like, excuse my language, but like, oh fuck, like maybe this is not as simple as I think it is. Maybe I can't do this on my own. And it was kind of like one of those first like crushing blows of like of experiencing powerlessness. And I reached out to my mom, and I was like, Mom, I gotta stop drinking. Like this is insane. And for whatever reason, I didn't end up going to a meeting in my hometown that summer. I had gone to meetings before. I think I've shared in this meeting before, like growing up with parents in AA, I was in AA meetings, like as an infant. I carried out my mom's cake at her 20th anniversary when I was like 15. And actually like this guy shared for her, because in New York, in this part of New York, people like share for you. You don't kind of speak for yourself at the meeting. And, the seeds of AA are like planted for the first time listening to this guy share when I was 15. And for whatever reason, I didn't go to a meeting that summer. But when I came back to school, I was working this job on campus organizing like our chapter, like our school's chapter for Habitat for Humanity. I was supposed to be like a student leader. This is what other people were calling me. And like, I wanted to be that. I was raised by my parents to like be a good person, to be responsible, to live by principles. And like, when I was drinking, I was Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. I could be a respectful person in the daylight. And then when night fell, like I would drink and I would black out, and I would just do absurd, antisocial things. And, and my experience was that, so I ended up on the, like, emotionally, I was just thinking about suicide all the time. And I was having like a severe emotional episode like once a month. And I reached out at the counseling center at my school, and like, I was willing to be honest for the first time about my drinking. Well, first, I was willing to be honest about kind of what happened to me as a child. And then I was willing to be, I talked a little bit about, I was just willing to be honest. And they were like, I don't think I talked to the counseling center about my drinking, but they sent me to the alcohol counselor. And I was willing to be honest with him for the first time, like, because I had to go before, because there were infractions, there were alcohol education classes where I had to go, and like, how often do you drink a week? And I wasn't honest, but I was willing to be honest this time. And he luckily was like a sober member of AA for many years. And he was like, you're an alcoholic. How would you feel about going to meetings? And, I was at the jumping off place, as the book describes. Like, I couldn't live with it. I couldn't live without alcohol. And like, I just desperately wanted my life to change. And, I saw older folks getting sober in my hometown, but I didn't know young people could get sober. And like my third meeting, I saw this woman. She was really like a girl, celebrate a year. She was a year younger than me, which means she had gotten sober when she was 16. So, and luckily in Baltimore, as some of you may know from going to Ikipa this, not the past weekend, but this past month, we had a pretty vibrant young people's community in Baltimore. And, I'm like so grateful for young people's meetings, because I needed to see that I could get sober, because I just didn't think it was possible. And, I started going to meetings, and, I didn't really like it, because people were talking about how their lives were changing, and like my life was not changing, like those first like 2 weeks of going to meetings, it was like, okay, now I don't have alcohol, but I don't have any tools, and I'm sitting here listening to how good life can be. But like my life's not changing. And this guy reached out to me, and he was a year older than me, and he was coming up on a year of sobriety, and people told me to like find a sponsor that had something that I wanted. And my mom had like 25 years or whatever, and I saw older people with like a lot of time, but like that being an 18-year-old, like none of that really computed for me. But like this guy who had a year, like I was like, oh, I want that, I want to be sober for a year. And so like I asked that guy for help, and we dove into the 12 steps, and like that's where I started to see the change in my life. And that's where I started to like going to meetings. When I was doing the 12 steps, I started liking being a part of the 12-step fellowship. And I have like 30 seconds left, but what I want to say is that like life is infinitely better now than it could have ever. I mean, as I said, I thought I was going to die when I was 18, and I've now been living on borrowed time for 10 years, and like life is good. Life is really good. Life can be amazing sometimes. Life doesn't always, my experience of that is not that it's always amazing. My experience is that it's often difficult, and like just because we get sober young does not mean that life doesn't happen. My experience has been that life definitely happens, but I get to show up for it, and I get to have really great experiences and really difficult experiences sober, and I get to live through them and like put them in my like sober experience vault, or like whatever, like I get to have those experiences to draw on when the next thing happens, and by seeing that I get carried through those experiences, good and bad, with the help of AA and with the help of a higher power, I can see that like I can stay, like I don't have to take a drink no matter what. And if I practice these principles in all my affairs, as the 12 step suggests, I can have that experience of freedom and peace and ease that came to me when I took my first drink, and it might not be as instant gratification-y as the first drink is. It might take some time, and it might take some structure and discipline, but ultimately we can have really, really good lives here. And so that's all I have. Thanks again, Robert, for asking me to speak, and it's been a pleasure. Thank you.
Thanks, Timothy.
Thanks, Timothy.
Thanks, Ken.
Good lead.
Thanks, Timothy.